Greetings, humans. Welcome to the Black Pill. This is going to be a review of Alice's Adventures in Underland by friend and mensch, Diana Knipling. Book reviews often start with the lines, "The author asked me to review the book and provided a copy gratis," something like that. But I like books, and I like people who write them. So I bought a copy of this book because I wanted it. And I'm writing a review because I think it can aid in our understanding of some key existential concepts, and because I think it's worth reading. So, Death and Children. Here we go. Death and Children. This turns you off. It is risky. It's visceral. We want to protect our children from harm, sure, but also even from any thought of harm, from the very idea of harm. Keep them from witnessing violence of any kind. Uh, Mostly, I mean, my wife at the time I wrote this was teaching fourth grade, and she would bring regular reports that her fourth grade students and younger were watching The Walking Dead with their parents at night, and that's clearly cray. Anyway, for the most part, we don't want our children to think of death. They outlive their pets, and we contrive ways to keep the death of their friends away from them. We, for sure, turn off the nightly news. Man, I'd rather my son at a young age was watching The Walking Dead than a gang of white nationalists trying to steal democracy on January 6th. Uh, mm, Man, we sanitize. Is that all for the best? Well, the denial of death is a luxury only available to very wealthy societies. We have a whole underclass devoted to keeping death a secret, sanitizing it, sterilizing it. Coroners and morticians, undertakers, preparers of bodies. Someone in my family was the makeup artist, putting the little pads in so the face will fill out, even though it's dead and slack and laying horizontal, and the makeup and the lipsticks and the prosthetic eyes and all that stuff. But it wasn't always like this. Bodies used to stay in your home for a few days after the person had passed. The smell of death was masked with flowers, hence the tradition of flowers for sympathy. Your loved one would lay on the dining table or in your bed awaiting the day of the funeral. The family washed and dressed the body. It was unavoidable. This is what I mean by sanitized. We aren't castrating hogs on our farms, or putting down the runts, or chopping the heads off chickens and plucking them for supper. Death is not a daily event, but something we have to do with our children, a conversation that must be had, like the talk. Are we having it? Enter Deanna Knipling. Alice's Adventures in Underland, the Queen of Stilled Hearts. It's a fascinating bit of line blurring fiction. It stands out, difficult to put into a normal genre, horror or fantasy or historical or literary. It is the story of the story of Alice. How did Lewis Carroll, also known as Charles Dodgson, come to write the iconic story? What was his relationship with Alice, then just a young girl? The story flip flops back and forth between the events around the creation of the story and the tale itself. Just to keep things crazy, there's a twist. Dodgson is a zombie kept as a pet, a kind of servant. Some of the themes of Alice are amplified here. The cover's ripped off. Dodgson calls his stories a bit of nonsense, an amusing pastime. In fact, though, we're wondering what it means to be sane in a crazy world and to court madness. Ultimately, what is madness if not death, a kind of death? You've lost yourself. A self that has gone on has died. When we fear madness, we fear the loss of identity, walking death. And Underland, the place Dodgson says zombies come from, is full of walking death. Alice has to learn to pass as one of the dead, pass among them, navigate the peculiar madness, the madness of the dead mirrors, as it must, the madness of the living. This is Sartrean banality, an echo of Shakespeare's famous lines, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools, the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Life is banal and full of banality. A bit of nonsense is all we get. We strive for meaning, and here is Dodgson's desire to be a minister, as the real Charles Dodgson was. But zombies cannot be ministers. Once you've seen death, and no banal explanations suffice any longer. There's more here. Like any ambiguous stimulus, you can stare into Alice and see whatever you want. It's the current of unease through this story, never fully realized and never fully resolved, that brings me back. That's the unease that fills us when we try to tell our children what death means. The unease that makes us want to gloss the whole thing over with stories about heaven, eternal life, loved ones, looking down on all our earthly actions. Just a bit of nonsense to pass the time. In our world, in our country, children are protected from death and the idea of death. We think we have all the time in the world, that medicine can save us. In Alice, and indeed in Victorian England, there were no such protections. Life and death were brutal and constant and unavoidable. And we had constant wars, slavery, sex crimes, transportation, piles of hands cut off native workers who did not bring us enough booty. Isn't enough to gloss over death with pretty stories, or to expose us constantly to it, or to ignore it. So are you ready for that talk?